So today I want to wrap up on Russell's idea that names are more basic than descriptions, that the Frege-Searle idea that you explain names in terms of descriptions can't be right because descriptions are complex, how many phrases, whereas names are simple. And then I'll just review what came up in discussion last time, what Russell says about the Golden Mountain, and then just glance briefly at Russell's own positive take on the problems that were concerning Frege about informativeness and how names refer. Then, with that, today we wrap up on, how should I say, the classical background. And next Monday, we started on Kripke and basically the modern world. Kripke's views are far and away the most influential views of any single philosopher now. And we'll be looking at the basic ideas that I think most people now think are probably correct on how to address many of these questions on Monday. But let's start out with this thing about names being more basic than descriptions. So the idea here is, in Frege and Searle, the picture was, the way a name refers is, you hook the name up to a description, and the description picks out an object, and that's how the name picks out an object. And Russell's point is, there's got to be, even if that is how it works for some names, even if that is how it works for Aristotle or Scott, it can't be right for names in general. There has to be a basic class of names that gets hooked up to objects, but not by being defined in terms of descriptions, because they're more basic than descriptions. Russell's idea is, you could have a language that had names but no descriptions in it. But you could not have a language that had descriptions but no names in it. That makes no sense. Names are more fundamental than descriptions. So one way to get at, there are different ways you could do this, but here's one way to get at what Russell's idea here is. So I want to talk about, this is a notion that's not in Russell, a notion I just made up basically called witnessing. Witnessing. Now, you can't tell just from the word what I mean by that, right? So let me explain. Suppose you have a remark like, someone is F. So what have you got here? Is there a singular term? Is there a general term? Sorry? There's a general term. Is there a singular term? No, very good, okay. Right, there is only the general, the how many term, someone, right? Now, the thing is, if you ask me, are there any basketball players in the room? I can say, well, someone here's a basketball player. I know that. Someone here's a basketball player. There's always a further question you can ask, namely, and who is that? Who is it that is that basketball player? Okay? So it can't just stop there. That I say, someone is F, and you say, and who is it? But I say, the road stops there. There's no such thing as going further and naming this person. I mean, it might be that there is someone in the class who has the misfortune not to have been given a name yet. Right, that could happen. But we could always give them a name. It couldn't be that it's true that someone is F, but if you ask, and who is that, there is no answer. Okay, so that where there is a general, a how many statement someone is F, there is always going to be an answer to the question, namely. And then you put in the name, and you say A is F. We comfortable with that? And I'll call that witnessing. When you have a general statement, there is something that is F, and then you go further and name it. I'll call that witnessing the how many statement. Witnessing in something like the sense of bearing out the truth of. Okay? So if you've got how many statements, there must be name statements to witness them. You couldn't have the how many statements without name statements. Suppose I say there's exactly one x that is F, and any y that is F is also G. We've all said that from time to time, right? Right? There's exactly one person in the room who's a basketball player, and any basketball player is tall. Then it's got to be possible to go further. Must it be possible? Let me put it to you. Must it be possible to witness this statement? What is it to witness this statement? Right, by using a name. Right? Use a name to say which x is it that is the exactly one x that's F, and if F is also G. You see what I mean? Let's recap. Okay, everything was going well up to this point, right? Okay, so you see that's a how many statement, and then you can ask for the name of the thing. Is this a how many statement? Yeah, it says exactly one. What could be more how many than that, right? So if there's exactly one thing that's F, it must be possible to answer the question, and which thing is it that is the exactly one thing that is F? If I say there's at least one basketball player in the room, you can ask namely. But if I say there's exactly one basketball player in the room, you can also say, and who is that? You can ask for the name. Yep.
So I mean, obviously in that specific example, if you say there's exactly one basketball player, then you should be able to say who. But more generally, if you're making that kind of an existential statement, why do you always have to be able to identify X?
Oh, you do. It has to be possible to identify it, right? I mean, this is what I was talking about last time. If I'm
in theory, but not pragmatically.
That's right.
Okay.
If I'm facing the board and someone speaks, I might whirl round and say, "Who made that remark?" Yeah, but I've no idea who it was. But if someone told me there is no answer to that question, someone spoke, but there is no name. It's not possible to name the person. That's a philosopher. That makes no sense whatever. You see what I mean? Yeah. Okay, so if I say there's exactly one x as F, it must be possible to give a name to it. Yeah? It must be possible to witness it. Okay? So when I've got that exactly one x as F, I can answer the question namely. I can witness it. And how will I witness it? I will witness it by using some name. Let us say A. A is uniquely F. Okay? I mean, that's just logical, right? That's all fine so far. Okay? But now, suppose I take this, there's exactly one x as F, and any y that's F is also G. There is a more colloquial way of saying this. We can say, the F is G. These just mean the same thing. If you're going to say the F, it's only right to say the F if there's exactly one F. If I say the King of America, it's only right to say that if there's exactly one King of America. If there are 0 kings or if there are 2 kings, then what I say can't be right. Okay, so if I say the F, that means there's exactly one F. Yes? Does this mean the same as this? Can you identify any difference in meaning between these two statements? Yep.
I'm not sure if it's a difference in meaning, but I'm interpreting that sentence a little differently than you.
Which one?
The first one. Up there.
Yeah.
I'm interpreting, using formal logic. I'm saying there's an element X in the set F such that
The meaning of that would be different, but that the way you've put it requires that there be elements which are f, but are not the exactly one f. But that's a contradiction, right? If there's exactly one f, there can't be anything else that's f.
But you're saying there's exactly one x in f. Or you're saying that the x is identical to f.
I wouldn't put it, I'd say there's exactly, maybe this is English and American. I said I have the 1x which is f. Suppose I said 1x, that is f.
Identity statement. Okay.
No, I just mean, if I say there's exactly one basketball player in the room, right, and it turns out there are two, then what I said is wrong. Yeah?
For difference, the f is g doesn't mean it exists, right? There's exactly one x, means there exists f,
But when I say the f, it doesn't mean there exists an f.
yeah, like it could be, I don't know.
So if you say the King of America, you think that's fine?
Well, it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't exist, right?
No, it doesn't exist, right? There's no such thing.
But then when you say there's exactly
Yeah.
person to the king of America, aren't you implying that there is a king of America?
That's right. But if I say the King of America, aren't I also implying that there is a King of America? Do you see what I mean? That's why people don't talk about the King of America. Because there's no such thing, right? It makes no sense. Oh, it makes sense, but it just doesn't exist. So you don't talk about it. You don't use that phrase. Yeah? So if you're going to talk about the F, there has to be at least something which is F. Yeah. Yep.
I'm having trouble understanding what F and G correspond to in plain language.
Yep.
So with the example you used, the basketball player is being tall, it would translate to the basketball player is tall.
That's right.
If we inverted the F and G, then it would be the tall is basketball player. So I'm wondering
Yeah.
how these predicate function. Are they only categories or are they descriptions? Or
Well, what you put in there is a general term, in the sense in which is tall is a general term. And to make it colloquial, you sometimes have to bash things around a bit. Yeah. So if you want to say, if you want to put tall in for the F slot there, yeah, what you'd have to say is the tall one, or something like that. The tall one is F. Sorry, the tall one is G. You see what I mean? Yeah. So you can always get the effect, but sometimes to make it colloquial, you have to bash it around a bit. But
they are general terms?
but yeah, F and G are always general terms. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't understand. Does this say there is exactly one x which is f, but nothing else has f aside from that? Is that what it's
That's right. If there's exactly one and something else is F, then that would be more than one. Do you see what I mean?
I thought that there's exactly one x, but other things could be f as well.
Ah, very good. No. When I say there's exactly one X, I mean consider the entire universe, the whole world, right? Absolutely everything. Or rather, absolutely everything that we're talking about at this moment. Do you see what I mean? So if we're just talking about the people in this room, then that's the whole world, so far as the present conversation goes.
So x and y are equated, they're equal, right?
They're both only talking about things in the room or things in whatever domain you're talking about. Do you see what I mean?
Is there, you're saying, is there, okay, there is one x, no more x's, but then other things could be
No, I
f.
don't mean there's one X. I mean there's only one thing that is F. Okay, look, I could get the same effect by saying there's exactly one thing which is F, and then Y is also G. Okay? Yeah? Okay. Thank you. We like to make sense. Okay. Okay, so this is a how, these two mean the same thing? We comfortable with that? Okay. And this is a how many statement? Yeah? Therefore, this is a how many statement? Okay? And this statement demands witnessing. A how many statement can be witnessed. You can always ask, and what is the name of that thing? Yes? So this is a how many statement. The F is G. So when you say the F is G, you can always say, and who is that? This F of which you tell me. What is its name? You haven't given the name just by giving the how many statement. So there have to be names underpinning the use of the definite descriptions. There has got to be an array of names that are more basic than the descriptions, that can witness the truth of your statements involving descriptions. So you can say I witnessed that by giving it a name. A is F. Okay? That's to say, there's got to be a basic class of names that is going to get tied up to objects, but not by being defined in terms of descriptions. This is a very basic kind of logical point, but you see that if it's right, it just blows up Frege and Sell. It blows up the natural way of thinking about these problems. Yeah.
So, can't somebody just respond to that by saying that when you have a definite description and then you ask for a name and then you give a name, what you're doing is giving a name that stands for that description that you had before the name?
It doesn't stand for the description. It stands for the object that is denoted by the description.
I know that's what you're saying, but I'm saying,
I don't know what you mean, but.
Can't you just, I mean, it seems kind of arbitrary which way you go. It seems like you could just as easily describe it in the way than
Okay. Let me try putting this another way. Suppose you take, any language is going to have singular terms and general terms. And suppose you ask, how are the general terms of a language explained? Okay. How do you, so suppose you've got general terms like is tall, plays basketball, smokes, fishes, right? So you've got these general terms. Now, suppose I don't know the meaning of these words, right? Everyone in the class was at one point at that stage, right? There was a time in your life when you didn't know the meaning of any general terms. So how do you have the meanings of the general terms explained to you? Suppose I don't know the meaning of is tall. Right? I'm alert, intelligent, I can see very well, but I just don't know what is tall means, and you're not going to explain that to me, right? Now, could you do it? Could you explain the meaning of is tall to me by using general terms? Sorry, by using how many terms? What I mean is, suppose you take, so I say, now what does tall mean? I hear people talking of tallness, but I never get what it is. And you look around the room and you say, well, someone is tall. Say, well, thank you. Or you say, many people here are tall, though some are not. I still don't get it, right? What I'm going to have to do to get an understanding of the general term is to have you say to me, well, look over here. Bill is tall, and Sally is tall, and Jemima is tall, but Charlotte is not tall. Right? If you'd give me names for all the tall ones and names for the ones that are not tall, then I can get it. Then I have a chance of getting what you're talking about. If you confine yourself to using general terms, like what is death? I just know what death. Remember that time when you didn't know what death? Maybe you guys still don't know what death is, but there was a time when you really didn't know what death was, right? And if you're just told, well, you know, everyone dies, that doesn't tell you what it means, right? You need some examples. I won't go into. Let's not get too deep into this. But you need some cases, right? You need cases in order to understand the general terms. The only way you get cases is by getting a name. That's another way of coming at the point that you only understand what the general term, I keep saying general term when I mean how many, but I hope you can follow me. The only way you can understand what the how many term means is, I explained to you what is tall means in the context of all these names, like Jemima or Harry or whatever. And then you say, now what does it mean to say someone is tall? Well, what it means to say someone is tall is, I can find you a name that if you put it into the is tall slot will give you a true sentence. So when you're explaining the meanings of the signs of a language, you have to explain the general terms in conjunction, in the context of their use with proper names. I mean, with real names. And then these how many terms come later. They come next. If you didn't have any names in your language, you wouldn't be able to understand the general terms. There'd be no such thing as having the general terms explained to you. Okay, we're building up. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. So why couldn't you just say tall means anyone above 6'3"?
You could give a definition, sure.
So there you define a general term, you understand what a general term means without having any properties.
Very good, yeah. You could certainly do that. You can. It is always an option to explain one general term in terms of other general terms, right?
Okay.
So that's what you just did,
Sure.
right? But now consider the general terms that you used to explain that first term. Yeah. How are those explained? You could give a definition of them too. Yeah. But then that definition will itself have to appeal to more general terms. That process has to come to an end somewhere. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, you are going to have to explain the general terms by giving examples. I mean, this is very obvious with colour words. If you think of terms like red or scarlet or yellow, right, then it's very hard even to give one definition of them in terms of other general terms. Yeah.
The color spectrum, if you use this.
Oh, you mean you could say
Wavelengths.
orange is the one in between red and...
No, I mean like the wavelength, the actual like scientific wavelength.
Oh, sure, you could do that, right? That's. I don't know if you've ever met a 4-year-old who's interested in what the colour words mean, but that's not how we do it. Do you see what I mean? That's pretty fancy. And the thing is, right, the thing is, if you did do that, right, if you did give the physics definition, yeah, someone could perfectly well understand the physics definition and be a real whiz at understanding the physics of the situation, and then say, oh, so that's what this shade is. And that could really be news. That could be an informative identity. This thing about the objects around me that I've often noticed, that is when they're reflecting light of those wavelengths. Isn't that weird? Who'd have thought it? Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have someone who understands the colour words quite independently of the physics, and then you define some general terms in terms of the physics, it's going to be news to be told it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think our ordinary understanding of colour words isn't by definition. Yeah. And indeed we know that the process of definition has to stop somewhere. So even if you don't like that example, there have got to be other examples. Yeah. And then when you come to those primitive general terms, the only way you're going to explain them is by giving examples. This one's red, this one's red, this one's red, this one isn't. That kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. Tall's the opposite of short. Sure, you can do that, but then you've got to explain what short means. Do you see what I mean? I get... No, that's fair enough. If you just take the understanding of some general terms for granted, then okay, that's fair enough. But really, the only reason you could do that is because you had the use of those general terms in the context of sentences with names in them. Yeah. Okay, you don't look very convinced, but
I can see why that undermines Searle, because Searle has like a cluster of definite descriptions, but why does that undermine Frege?
yeah, why doesn't it?
For Frege, like I didn't see like you could just have the proper name. Like I didn't see him use definite descriptions in the same way
Right.
Searle did. He had like the picture of your doghouse.
Yeah.
That's not a definite description to give it from two different sides. Those are just the way something is presented.
Very good. Yeah.
So I see how it undermines Searle's interpretation of Frege, but not Frege on its own.
That's perfectly fair. Frege is not quite explicit about what a mode of presentation actually is. I mean, that's actually why I introduced it with those photographs and so on, because there is this intuitive notion of your way of being presented with the object that is not obvious that that's the same thing as a description. But what I said about that was, when you get down to brass tacks, and you say to Frege, well, what does it mean? What actually are you talking about when you say the mode of presentation associated with the name Aristotle, for example? All he ever gives you is a description. That's all you ever get. So there is an abstract possibility, there is the bare possibility, as you say, of an interpretation of Frege that talks about mode of presentation or something like that, but doesn't talk about descriptions. Says, well, these are just examples Frege gives. But it's just not obvious what that means, what that would be. You see what I mean?
In the geometry example, it wasn't like a definite description, it was like a visual kind of thing.
That's actually why I put the geometry example up in colours the way I did. That geometry example, what he does is, you mean the one, the point of intersection of A and B is the same as the point of intersection of B and C. See, if you just take it literally at face value, he's given you two descriptions there. The point of intersection of A and B and the point of intersection of B and C. But it's very tempting to say, no, draw the diagram, and then he's talking about two visual ways of being given the thing, rather than the descriptions. He's just trying to indicate these visual ways of being given the thing, and they're different. But okay, that's a perfectly fair point. All I'd say is it's a challenge to say what that means, a mode of presentation that's not descriptive. There's one other here.
So, back to your logical statement where you said there's exactly one thing, which is F, and anything that is F is also G. Why do you need the first clause to logically equivalent that to the F is G? Like, if you just have anything that is F is also G, isn't that logically equivalent to the F is G?
I think that means just the same as what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure,
so that
right.
would do fine.
But then you're not required to witness it anymore, because you're not saying there's exactly one thing which is F, and anything that is F is also.
Oh no, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Can you just repeat what you're offering? Okay, so here is the
So
sentence.
just cut out the part before the comma. And if you say anything that is F is also G, isn't that the same as the F is G?
No. If I say
F is G? Or every F is G?
Every F is G or an F is G is the way I would.
Okay.
yeah, that's what you're saying. Every F is G.
Okay.
Right? But of course, it could be true that every F is G if there are no Fs.
But if every F is G, then it's also true that the F is G. You just
Oh, that will
arbitrarily pick
follow.
one.
Yeah, it will
Right.
follow that if there is a unique F.
Right, so
then it's
where
G.
does the witnessing enter in at that point? Because you said you have to be able to identify.
Oh, if you have a purely general statement, right? Every F is G. That's consistent with there being nothing, right? So no witnessing.
Right.
What I said was, if you take a statement like there is an X that is F, then there has to be witnessing. So in the logician's terms, if it's an existential, then there has to be witnessing.
Right.
But this is an existential.
But at the same time, if you use a universal quantifier and say every F is G, you can still deductively say any F is G, because every F is G is a given premise.
That's fine, but if you have a purely general statement here, that means something different to the F is G. Because if the F is G, there has to be something that is F. this goes right back to what I kept saying last time. If Waverley was written by a machine, then there is no such thing as the author of Waverley. Yeah? Or if it was made some kind of accident in a factory that produced Waverley, then it has no author. Then there is no such thing as the author of Waverley. Yeah? If America has no king, then there is no such thing as the king of America. A statement involving there has to be such a thing.
Okay, so
There has to be something which is a.
so it seems to me like what you're saying is if you just have every F is also G, that doesn't presuppose the existence of F. But if you're saying there is exactly one thing which is F, and every F is also G, then that presupposes the existence of F.
At least one, I think. Yes.
Okay.
Right. Okay, fine. Last one. Yeah.
So now that we've proved that sterile, doesn't make sense, are we going to take singular terms for granted? Are we going to take our understanding of names for granted? Don't we still need to explain that?
This is what we'll be spending the next 4 weeks on. You'll be pleased to hear. Right. The important. Yeah, absolutely. The important point is to see that we need a level of language use that is more basic than anything involving descriptions, right? And this is, in a way, what we're doing right now is clearing the ground. We're trying to identify what the most basic aspects of language are so that we can get on to asking, and how does this hook on to the world? Yeah? And that's what the crypt key that we're coming on to on Monday is addressing. Right? It's exactly that. So what I want to do is I want to go, well, quite quickly over both of these things, actually. The implications that Russell draws from this about descriptions like the Golden Mountain. And then Russell has his own positive account, which is pretty wild. But the thing is, what we're cranking through here is quite dry, logical stuff. But the reason this is interesting is that so much hangs on what you say next, about what you think the fundamental ways are that language connects to reality. A lot about your picture of the world turns on what you say about what happens next. And with Russell at the end here, we'll get a first glimpse of that. So remember with Frege, you had the sign, and then there was a sense, or something like a description, fixing the reference, and the reference of the sign. Right? All happy with that? That's Frege's picture. And then there was this alternative picture that you just got the name and you got the object that it refers to. Now, on that model, remember when I was talking about dot and squiggle and smudge? When you're thinking of names like that, the only way you can, when you're thinking of a name as simple, in the way that Russell thinks of a name as simple, then the only way you can explain its meaning is by saying what it stands for. So if I'm trying to explain the meaning of a name like squiggle or dot or smudge, the only way you can explain its meaning is by showing the thing it stands for. If you don't do that, then you haven't given the name a sign. So in that model, a name can't have meaning when it doesn't refer. It makes no sense to suppose you've got a name that has meaning but no reference. Okay, and that was really the model of that thing about smudge. Okay? So if a name is simple, you can't explain its meaning by giving a description. And there's no other way to explain its meaning except by showing the thing it stands for. And then Russell's point about terms like the Golden Mountain is that you understand perfectly well what they mean, but they don't refer. And then if you think that these are really just kind of names, you're going to say something stupid. You're going to say, for example, as who was it, Meinong said, the Golden Mountain must really have existence, even though you can't actually find it. It doesn't subsist, but it must be just shimmering just beyond anything perceptible, right? It must be really hanging out there somewhere. Could we but find it? but of course it doesn't subsist, so you can't find it. And similarly for the tartan sun, or I don't know. Anyway, any mad description you like has to have, as long as it has meaning, there has to be something out there giving it meaning. The round square, the tallest unicorn, the King of France, the King of America. The King of America must be out there somewhere because the phrase makes sense. How could it make sense if it didn't stand for something? Well, the answer is these are descriptions. They have their meaning because of their connections to general terms. So you don't explain the meaning of the descriptions like the Golden Mountain or the King of France on this model. Yeah? If you did try to explain them in that model, that's where you get led into supposing that all these things exist. And as Russell says, if you're going to talk about all these objects somehow existing out there but not subsisting, you have you have a failure of that feeling for reality, which ought to be preserved even in the most abstract studies. I have to say that it seems to me that after class last time, I got into a long argument about fictional names and whether Hamlet exists. And once you wind up saying that Hamlet does exist after all, or as one person, I won't say who shall remain nameless, was saying Santa Claus does exist in a sense, there I think you have lost that feeling for reality. Right, it's very important to keep a hold on to those things. Santa Santa does not exist, even though the sign makes sense. Okay, so how does, well, I mean, what's Russell's positive account here? Russell's trying to have this account. There's a sign and the object, and that's it. Russell is saying, let's go right back to Frege's starting point. You have to dig a little bit in the article to see exactly where he is doing this. But I think if you look, you can see that he is doing what I say he's doing. He's going right back to where Frege began. He's saying, let's consider this model where there's the sign and the reference to the sign. If you've got a simple name, that's all there is to the meaning of the thing. The sign and the object. And Frege had two objections to that. One was this thing about informative identities, and the other was this thing about the possibility of meaning without reference. So Russell has to have answers to both of those if he's going to explain how this can be correct for the most basic class of names in your language. And what Russell says about informativeness is this. He says, so long as names are used as names, if Scott and Sir Walter are really both simple names, then Scott is Sir Walter is the same trivial proposition as Scott is Scott. So what he's saying is, if you really have names there, if they're simple names, then you can never have an informative identity. What Frege was saying about informative identities was right for descriptions. If you get different descriptions on either side of an identity sign, then you can have something that's informative. So long as you get two simple names on either side of an identity sign, you never get anything that's informative. So if you find an informative identity, like the morning star is the evening star, let's take it that's an informative identity, that's got to be two descriptions. It just follows, since you got an informative identity, these are really two descriptions. They're not really names. If you really got names, the identity is always uninformative. So Frege's puzzle about informativeness doesn't arise for proper names. And he says most of these things that we call proper names usually, like Bill Clinton, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Homer, these are not actually names, because it makes sense to ask, does Homer exist? And if Homer was really a name, it wouldn't make sense to ask, does it exist? Because from the mere fact that the name Homer means something, you can't it follows that the thing must exist. Yep.
Sorry, could you go back to the other slide? 'Cause it seems to me like if you've heard from someone of a Sir Walter, right? You've heard stories about
Yes.
Sir Walter, but you don't know who that person is. You've never
Yes.
seen him.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden someone says, you've known all along, Scott. Scott is Sir Walter.
Right.
It seems like it's informative right there. And you
Very
also
good, yeah.
associated the label and the object to all of those facts that you know about
Yeah.
Sir Walter.
But the way you put it was really helpful, actually, in revealing. You said, you know a Sir Walter, right? So you're using Sir Walter there as a general term,
Okay.
right? You could say, well, there are 4 Sir Walters here.
But there could be 4 Scots, so I could ask which Scott
Okay,
is Sir Walter.
right, if you use Scott in that way, you're using it as a general term. Yeah, it's because you're using them as general terms that you can get the informative identities here.
But then,
What he's saying is, so long as names are used as names, not as general terms, not as descriptions, then you're going to get something trivial.
but then he doesn't fully counter Frege, because Frege says no one can prevent me from using any object as a sign,
Right.
arbitrarily. So then I can say, well, any sign is really a general term.
Very
So
good.
there are
That's
some
great.
proper
Okay.
names.
I want to put that on hold for just, less than 5 minutes. Can I just put that on hold just for a second? Because Russell does have an answer to that, but it's with this answer that you start to see the point of the whole thing. And we don't want to get to that too quickly, do we? Well, was it? I had a sense of someone else's hand being up, but no. Okay. But that's exactly the position. Every time Frege finds phenomena that suggest that this picture is wrong, and you've got to have the other one, the sense picture, Russell is going to say, that just shows that these aren't really proper names you're talking about. Homer can't be a name. Bill Clinton can't be a name, because you can ask significantly, do these things exist? No names in the strict sense occur. But what seem like names are really descriptions. Most of the things we take to be names are not names, they are really descriptions. The exceptions, the real names, are terms like this and that, and a few other words, the meaning of which varies on different occasions. So you can talk about this and that, but what you're actually referring to in any particular occasion will vary. So the meaning of this varies from occasion to occasion when you use it. And similarly for signs like yonder. So the thing is, the basic picture he has is that the class of names that the rest of language depends on are signs that refer only to your own current or recent sense data. So you have signs like this referring to your current sensation of redness, or that referring to your current frisson of joy, assuming that this is what's going on. Then you have names referring to those things. Language has this structure where at a sophisticated level there are all these descriptions, these complex defined terms, clusters of descriptions. At the base level, there are only simple names identifying your own current sense data, your own current sensations, just the immediate psychological states you're having, your own current perceptions. Now, that's where he rejects, this is to answer your question, that's where he rejects Frege saying anything can be used as a name for anything. Because all that you can name using a simple term are your own current sense data. If you want to talk about a physical object, if you want to talk about another person, you have to use a description. You have to say something like, I'm getting a lot of table-ish sense data right now. Look, this is a table-ish sense datum, and that was a table-ish sense datum. I bet you there's a table out there causing those sense data. I mean, we do that just reflexively without thinking about it in adult life, but that's what's happening. Someone keeps asking a lot of questions. I get a lot of challenging sense data, right? I say, hey, I'm getting a lot of flack here. I'm getting a lot of grief here. There must be a questioner out there producing all these vexatious sense data, right? I'll call that thing the questioner. You see what I mean? So if I wanted to say anything about something in the world around me, I have to use a description. With names, I'm confined to my own current sense data. Descriptions are what allow me to get beyond talk about my own current sense data. And this is not just a fact about me, this is how it works for you too. All your own understanding of language depends on this base class of terms talking about your own current psychological states. So your basic capacity to think at all is grounded in your capacity to think about your own current psychological states. Just 1 second, I just want to... the thing is, suppose you consider Frege's two arguments about informativeness and meaning without reference now. Suppose we're at this most basic level of language use where you only have terms like this and that referring to your own current perceptions, your own current experiences, your own current sense data. Can you have true informative identities there? Well, Russell's point is you can't. The problem doesn't really arise for sense data. Because suppose, for example, I've got a pain in my foot and a sensation of red from vision. And I say, okay, consider this sensation of red, that pain in the foot. Are they identical? Well, they're obviously not identical. I mean, if they seem non-identical, they're not identical. That's how your own sensations work. It's your own mind. You know all about which of your own sensations are the same and which are different. Whereas, if I say, this pain is this pain, that's true, but it's trivial. It's just perfectly obvious to me that this pain is this pain. Within the confines of my own mind, I can't have informative identities. It can't be that someone says, well, science has shown that actually the pain in your foot is the same thing as that funny tingling feeling in your ear. Science can't do that. We're just talking about my sensations. I get to judge about my sensations, whether they're the same, or I'm authoritative about that. So, for logically proper names, for real proper names, for proper names that refer only to your own current or recent sense data, these questions about informativeness don't arise. And consider Frege's argument about meaning without reference. Could you say, well, I understand this sign, this, perfectly well, but I don't know what it stands for? Well, if this is a sign referring to your own current sensation, how could it be that there's no such thing? That makes no sense. If you think you've got having a sensation of red, then you are having a sensation of red. With Homer, you might think there's such a thing, but it might turn out there's no such thing. With Buzz Aldrin, you might think there's such a thing, but it might turn out it was all a hoax. With Bill Clinton, it might turn out, well, there really wasn't such a person, it was all put together. With your own sensations, you cannot be mistaken. So, for simple names referring to your own current sensations, Russell says, you don't need this Frege stuff about reference. That's how you can have a view that only has the sign and the object and no sense. So you don't need the notion of sense. You have the descriptions which are explained as how many terms, and you have the true simple names that are explained in this way. Notice, though, that there is a real price here. I want to take just one question, because you haven't asked a question before.
Yeah, so names could refer to future sense data.
To future sense data.
That are anticipated.
I'm pretty. I don't remember Russell explicitly excluding that, but I am pretty sure he thinks not. Yeah, because a future sense datum, like if I'm sitting in the cafe thinking, "Boy, will that coffee taste good if it ever comes?" Yeah, and I'm anticipating the coffee. Yeah, the taste of the coffee. I've got to be. His picture is I've got to be acquainted with the sensation. I've got to have some knowledge of the sensation in order to refer to it. And there what you've got is, you've got a description. You've got something like, the taste that coffee is going to produce in me if it ever comes. When you only have a prediction of the future sensation, that's always descriptive. Do you see what I mean? I think that's the picture. It would be a kind of seeing into the future, a kind of premonition or something like that. Second sight, if you could get the sensation from now, what sensation you're going to be having in 5 minutes. Yeah. So his picture is that what's fixing the reference of a name is acquaintance, what he calls acquaintance, which is, consider your own, I mean, I guess you look at the screen, you've got a sensation of greyness. Consider your own current relation to that sensation of greyness. What is the relation you stand? It's a very intimate relation, right? You know, when you're having a headache, there are two different things there. There's you and there's the headache. But you are very intimately related, you and that headache. That's the poignancy of the whole situation, right? The intimacy of the relation between you and it. Russell's name for that intimate relation is acquaintance. You might think it's closer and deeper than mere acquaintance, but anyway, he calls it acquaintance, right? And he says that relation of acquaintance is what makes it possible for you to talk about, to think about those things. But notice that there is a terrible price being paid. Your picture of reality is completely defined in terms of its relations to your own sense data. My picture of reality is completely defined in terms of its relations to my sense data.